Hello?
Hello, Jane. Share your screen, please.
Hello? Hi.
Okay, we can see it very well.
Okay,
You
can you
are
hear me?
live. Yes.
Okay. Hi. So, hi, my name is Ruby Jane Cabagnot. I'm here in Authn, Norway. And yeah, it's great to be part of this room conference. This is my first time. So, yeah, so this is OpenID Connect and OO2 for web developers and reduction, actually. So, okay, so let's see what's the agenda here. So first of all, let's talk about OpenID Connect and in such a way that it is easy to understand. And so by using some simple analogy flow and installations with the OO2. So, so let's see what is their flow. So OpenID Connect allows the devs to authenticate users across websites and apps without having to own and manage password files. And OO2 is actually the basis of the OpenID Connect. And it is a delegation protocol designed to help you access third-party APIs. So in a nutshell, OO2 protocol and along with the OpenID Connect provided a wide range of options for properly securing applications. And so what is their flow? So basically identity authentication plus OO2 equals OpenID Connect. So, okay, so the agenda here is to just get a high level of understanding of the basic concepts of the OO2 and OpenID Connect so that when using identity server or authentic authorization server in our applications, we are aware of what's happening. Okay, so so before anything else, let's start off with a simple analogy to understand authentication and differentiate it with authorization, which can be a bit confusing sometimes, maybe because they sound almost the same. So, okay, so let's say you are flying off to another country and let's say to your favorite holiday destination and you go to the airport and you go to the check-in counter, right? And then you give your passport or your ID. So of course the airline personnel will check the information in the passport, such as your name, your birthday, the issue date, the expiration date, and so on. And list check it against with your booking reservation system, so it has to match. So all of this process called authentication. So the airline is authenticating your identity to verify that you are who say you are. So after undergoing the verification and authentication process with the airline personnel, you then should be given a boarding pass. So now this boarding pass allows you to do certain things, right? And of course, allows you, foremost of which is to board the airplane. Airplane, yeah. So meaning you are now authorized to board the airplane because you have the boarding pass. And this process is called authorization. No, so as you can see, authentication is not the same banana as authorization. So simply put, authentication is the process of verifying who the user is, while authorization is the process of verifying what they have access to or to what extent. So, okay, so but keep in mind that in this session that we are focusing on is the OpenID Connect and the OO2, which is the authentication. We just need to get that out of the way right from the beginning because we just need to understand those two important concepts. Okay. So, okay, so what are claims-based identity? So essentially, they are just personal information such as your name, your address, contact numbers, and whatever. So like in our passport, we typically have our names, our birth dates, the issue date, the expiration date that is being checked by the, let's say, the airline personnel. So in a sense, our passport, um, here we are claiming that this is who we are. So in our Well, in our application, let's say it can be organization specific, which can contain your company name, your company ID number, whatever, or relevant information that you have provided. So in a claims approach to authentication, trust is explicit. Your application believe a claim and about the current user, and only if it trusts the identity that it can issue the claim. So these are called the claims-based identity. Okay, so now let's say we apply this concept to a typical modern application, which would look like more or less like this. So we have the browser and a mobile for front-end applications. So nowadays, our front-end applications typically talk to APIs, which can be coming from many different applications or projects that make up the whole functionality. So as you can see, this typical modern application brings challenges and complexities when performing authentication. So why? Because, for example, this web API has to know the identity of the user. But the problem is, how do we tell this web API who the user is? Because if you think about it, users are logged in from the web or the mobile app. But somehow this web API has to know who the user is, or to give authorization and to grant the user access or allow the user to do certain things. So how do we resolve this scenario? Well, this is where the identity provider comes into the picture. So identity provider essentially holds the claims. Again, what are claims? These are the personal information that the user that we mentioned earlier, right? So an identity provider is a service that stores and manages digital identities. So basically, your username and your password open doors to another resource. And one thing to keep in mind is that identity provider implements OAuth and the OpenID Connect. So not what happens is you typically just have one identity provider for all your applications in an organization. So this identity provider is central to the whole application or the whole organization, sorry. And all of these applications rely on that one identity provider. So usually companies use these services to allow their employees to connect with the resources they need. They provide a way to manage access or adding or removing privileges while security remains tight. So for example, if you've ever used Google or Facebook login to access a completely different application, you already use an IDP or identity provider. So your username and your password open doors to, like we said, to another resource. And you don't have to do anything special to make it happen. So an IDP workflow typically involves a request. So the user can enter credentials from another login, such as, let's say, Facebook or Google. And then there's a verification. The IDP checks with the company's, let's say, IT to determine if a user has access and to what extent is the access level. And then there's unlocking. So the user gains access to specified resources and the visit is logged. So all of this takes mere seconds. And the most users don't notice all of the hard work happening behind the screen. So yeah, so if you notice, the trusting is very important with OpenID Connect and OAuth. So once you're authenticated at the identity provider, you have this thing called single sign-on. You can switch in and out of between applications without logging in and time and time again. So identity providers can significantly reduce sign-in and registration friction, which allows your users to easily access applications without needing to create new passwords or remember usernames. So yeah, so basically here you have basically two options to create an identity provider. You can use one in the cloud, such as Microsoft Azure or ASW Single Sign-On or Google or Facebook and many other more identity providers. And of course, you can also you also have a choice to create one for yourself. So actually, it's just basically just another API that you can create yourself. But what for me personally, which one to choose? It depends. I know, right? So, but in my opinion, if we can use identity provider, um, yes, we should. For the simple reason that building and maintaining one for your application involves a lot of complexities that could eat up a lot of your company resources, including developers. Now, okay, so let's go back to the airline analogy and scrutinize that a bit because there's more to it than showing your passport. So, okay, on your left side is your passport, and you're showing it to your airline personnel at the check-in counter, right? So, okay, so but let's step back for a moment and realize that also there's also a trusted entity, such as the let's say the government that issued my passport. So the government has all my personal information. And of course, when I apply to get a passport, the government can then issue to me my passport. Now, this passport contains all my personal information that I provided to the government. Of course, the government cannot issue anyone to anyone else a passport with information that pertains only to me, right? That's the expected thing. The point here is that the passport issued by the government is a well-known and trusted protected identification document. So, like say, a government issued passport is perhaps one of those documents that accepted as an ID of to verify who you are wherever you go in the world, right? So, I guess in our airline analogy, the airline attendant also trusts this government um, uh, also trust this government issued passport that you are carrying. So that the passport is valid, that all the information inside your passport are correct and true. So of course, this trust relationship is another important aspect of authentication with OpenID Connect and O2. And yeah, like what I said, if you notice trust, this is an important aspect in the uh, for all this process to work. So you as a passport holder needs to trust the government also that will keep your information safe and will only issue your passport to you. And the airline personnel, on the other hand, also need to trust the government in holding is to do its job to protect your information and only issue the passport only to you. Okay, so let's apply this analogy to our application. So in OpenID Connect terms, we have clients. And clients are also applications that need authentication. So it's like the airline needs to do an authentication on its passengers. So in our analogy, keep in mind that the client is the airline. And clients typically have users. So in the case of airlines, they have passengers. Now, this identity provider is actually the government. So it is where all the information is kept safe and secure. And of course, it is also this API that is trusted by clients and users alike. The way both the airline and the passengers trust the government who issue the passenger's passport. So basically, this is what's going on here with the whole structure of the OpenID application. Okay, the whole thing with the identity provider is that it provides and protects our resources. Now, resources comes in two forms. The first one is the identity resource. Now, identity resource are your personal information. So these are the claims we mentioned earlier. And the second one is an access to one API on behalf of the user. So let's say I'm the user and a client tries to connect to an API or the identity provider. And that identity provider contains my identity as well as my consent or permission. Now, like what I said, there has to be a way for the identity provider to convey all of this information to the client, right? So because you see, logging process will take place identity provider and not at the front end application. So And the identity provider takes care of the logging in, and then the resources are disclosed. But how does the client receive this? And it's actually done with tokens. And these tokens are protected in a certain way that, well, I'm not going to go into detail here too much, but these tokens are protected and client can actually verify, and it knows for sure that the token came from that token service or that identity provider, and that is not tampered with. Now, there are actually two types of tokens that is synonymous with these types of resources. We have here the identity token with claims and the access token. Now, the access token is like a boarding pass that would allow us to board the plane. So this access token is used by the client so that when the client needs to connect to an API, it sends along this access token too. And remember that this token also contains the identity information about the user. So essentially, the API can know who the user is, right? Okay, so now that we understand that, or hopefully, let's take a look example of a real token. And the most popular token of today is the JOT or JWT. So here I'm just showing the JWT as the header and the body. So the header contains some basic information about the token itself, and there's the body. So the body contains the claims or information that you provided, such as names, roles, expiration dates, issuer, and such things. Um, Okay, for example, this one, the ISS is the issuer of the token, which can be used to verify the token that came from a trusted identity provider. And another important claim here is the the subject. So subject is a unique ID for that identity provider that identifies the user. So this one, it will never change. It is you always it always the same user ID, and it's actually used by applications to store, for example, user settings or preferences and associate them with that particular user. So now we can actually go to the question of what is OpenID Connect and what is OAuth. Okay, so first things first, OAuth is an open standard for authorization. Anyone can implement it. It is not an API or a service, but a standard. And specifically, OAuth is a standard that apps can use to provide client applications with secure delegated access, or access token for short. And OpenID Connect actually adopts the OAuth specification, but adds the identity token also. So, okay, now let's zoom into the whole authentication process itself. So we have here the client, and we have the identity provider. And at some point, this client kind of redirects to this identity provider, which will show a login page. Okay, now this login page is configured to trust this identity provider whenever it detects access to a certain page. Now, this identity provider has an authorization endpoint that it will take care of that redirect. We'll show that later. Okay, of course, a client needs to provide information to the identity provider. So it sends along a client ID and maybe a secret to the identity provider. And take note that this is not the user ID, but instead it is the ID of the application that does the authentication. And the second thing it sends along is the scopes. So what are scopes? Scopes are either can be bundle of claims, such as a profile, your name, city, address, or whatever information, or it can be access to a certain API. So one of those things is a scope. Now, the identity provider will check if the client with this client ID is allowed to ask for these scopes. So this is already configured in the identity provider. And after that, it will only then return the artifacts. So Next are the response types. So now the token response types will tell the identity provider what artifacts to return in the forms of tokens or other artifacts. And one last thing that the client needs to provide is the redirect URI. So this is like the client telling the identity provider where to send the token back. So yes, the client has to tell the identity provider upfront where it wants to receive the token. And of course, the identity provider has already been configured which URI is allowed for each client. Now, keep in mind that this is very important because if the URI doesn't match up, the whole process stops and an error is generated in the IDP or identity provider. So like what I said, if everything checks out, there will be potentially two screens. The first one is the login screen or authentication screen, and then the second one is the consent screen, in which the user consents to disclosure of the information and the API access for that particular or specific client. And when everything is okay and login is complete, then the artifacts are delivered to the redirect URI in the client. Okay, so I've created some demo slides here. Let's see how it works slides that I prepared prior to this. This is just a few simple and easy steps how the Microsoft Identity Server enables you to add identity authentication and authorization to our solution. So, okay, so like this one with this command, or let's say I'll bring, we'll be getting a brand new .NET web app that will also use Azure Active Directory for authentication. So you're here after building. Okay, let's get off to the Visual Studio Code. So, okay, and then here we just have a plain standard vanilla Razor web pages. So just click on yes on the pop-up required assets. And here in the program.cs, as you can see, the authentication part is where the lines 11 and 12. And there's two libraries that support this authentication out of the box. So you can see in lines 13 and the Microsoft Web, Identity Web, and the Web UI. So the web is middleware, and the Web UI is the one that will point to your sign in to your sign in and your sign pages when you navigate to that. Okay, so there's a few things that we need to set in our app settings at JSON. And for that, we need to create the administration in Azure AD. So first, we go to the Azure Active Directory, and then here, the app registrations, and then we go to the app registrations. As you can see here, the orange boxes. And again, here, put in the details like so and leave the supported account types as in the single tenants, and then just click register. And then it will take us here to this page. So we need to say that what our authentication intent. So click and add a platform that we're using. So here we're choosing the web because we're building an ASP.NET application. But you can see there's other stuff here like single page applications, mobile and desktop apps. And for redirect URIs, since we're running on .NET, so I put in here the localhost 5001 for orchestral, and then the sign in OIDC. Okay, so the sign in OIDC is coming from the callback in our app settings search listen, as you can see here. Of course, you can change it if you want, as long as they match. Now, okay, let's go back to the overview page in our Azure, and then look at the following information. So we need the client ID, the tenant ID, and the domain name, so that we can put it in our app settings. And here, if you want to look at the different endpoints, there you are. And then, Okay, after that, so okay, now we're good to go. Let's go back to our app and then run the .NET, um, run the .NET run. So after building it, you'll hopefully get these two screens after navigating to your specified port. So first thing we'll do is ask you to authenticate. So in this case, I signed in my account for this tenant. And then it will lead us to this consent screen, like what I said, to accept that it needs to read my profile, which is this is standard. Then after that, we are granted access to our app. So the standard we're seeing here is the OpenID Connect because we are only using the information to sign in the users. We're not doing any OO2 because we haven't grabbed any access tokens, although yet. Although if we are to call an API or graph, then we could be doing that. So, okay, so now I just like to have a quick overview of ways or services that we can utilize or secure our ASP.NET Core apps. Yeah, so here we have different options. So, but we're not going to go deep dive here because each one of these is a very big topic on its own. So first here, the ASP.NET Identity. So it is a framework that is currently um, is a current identity management strategy in ASP.NET. So basically, it provides extensive helper functionalities to help you develop identity management. For example, password hashing, user and password validation, password reset and email confirmation, user lockout, multi-factor authentication, and so on. And there's a template that you can use on Visual Studio 2022 by choosing the individual accounts in the application type dropdown, all through the .NET CLI, of course. When to use this? In a scenario where you can have two web apps plus two mobile apps, ASP.NET .NET Identity is good enough. So next we have here is the identity server. It is a secure token service or STS. So STS is a web service that issues security tokens. So that makes it assertions based on the evidence that it trusts. So whoever trusts it or to specific recipients. And then we have your identity server has license pricing. So for small companies or individual with less than 1 million USD in annual gross, and then it's free. And this is the NuGet package. So when to use this? Your services exist on, let's say, in different domains. This is where managing cookies and dealing out cookies or for different domains can be helpful. So you can use ASP.NET Core Identity with Identity Server for creating a highly secured systems. Next is the OpenID. So it is an Open Connect stack for ASP.NET Core and Microsoft Authn. So basically, this one offers native integration with popular object relational mapping tools and database clients like EF Core, Entity Framework 6, and Entity Framework Core or MongoDB. And this is the NuGet package plus the NuGet for stores like OpenID or Identity Framework. Um, Yeah, so who is this used for? Just like in the identity server, so it works the same as the identity server. There is a security token service or STS that issues security tokens. A token server that generates a simple data structure um, containing authorization or authentication information. So next is the Microsoft Identity Platform. So the Microsoft Identity Platform is a cloud service that helps you build applications for your users and customers. And you can sign to using Microsoft identities or social accounts and provide authorized access to your own APIs or Microsoft API like Microsoft Graph. And it has a built-in open standards and is totally compatible with open source libraries. And is for developers for building applications that integrate identity with a single toolkit. And of course, there's a template that you can use also in Visual Studio 2022. So by or through the .NET layer, like I said, and these are the teams building application in Microsoft Azure. Yeah. And last on my list is the Auth0. So Auth0 is also a cloud service, and for me, it's easy to implement, adaptable, authentic authorization platform. And here I always hear the DX of the using Auth0 super than other platform. And this is a duplicate package where you will need. This is some good feature like an AI to proactively monitor user access and disable dodgy logins. For example, logging in from a European country and Asian country a minute apart. And there's a ready-made registration tools which you need to build otherwise. Yeah, and then there's a password protection, for example, not allowing password that has appeared in a breach. And here's some of my readings for any source for this session if you want to learn more, understand more. And yeah, if you have any questions, you can message me or find me Twitter also. If you can, or if you're still looking to work in Norway, you have a Norway, please drop me a message. Find me in LinkedIn. Yeah, but it's for now, and thank you.